Thank you, Charles. I salute you once more. Please don't get tired of me. I promise a brief and concise session. And as Charles has mentioned, before we get into agenda, let me inform you that the region is supporting our programs in this area of fundraising. And we have a more detailed training and mentorship program for some of our national directors whom we are working together. So in our session today, we are not going to talk about specific training or specific fundraising skills, but this is a discourse to explore together how we could all build back better for our athletes. Next slide. So we start from where we stopped in the morning, and this is the vision of our strategic plan. Our vision is great. We all saw that in the morning. Our mission is urgent, just as it was in 1968. However, without resources, it will be very difficult for us to achieve this mission. And besides, our athletes deserve more than bare minimum. Now, to improve quality and reach for our athletes, the current strategic plan is asking us to diversify our revenue. Now, note that the keyword here is diversify, which could also mean enlarge or vary depending on which English dictionary you are using. And again, if there's one thing we have learned from this pandemic, is that depending on a single stream of funding is not only tragic for our bottom line, but also to our work. Next slide. As we take stock, and let's just go back to, let's say, we want to reflect on what we did this morning. We took some time to reflect on how COVID impacted our programs and services to our athletes. Now, in this session, I would like us to zoom in this reflection into our finances. And let's ask ourselves, as individual programs, as a team, as colleagues, as a region, how is our financial health? What financial lessons are we learning in this period?
Absolutely.
And most importantly, what can we do differently
comes from Special
to
Olympics
boost
Rwanda,
our
who shares that they use their coaches a great deal in reaching out to the families and athletes during COVID-19.
As we continue with this
Most
session,
of their coaches own
I would like
smartphones,
us to have
and
those
so
questions
WhatsApp has
at
been
the
their
back
main
of our
social
minds.
tool for their communications.
Hopefully,
Any response, Susan?
even when we go back to our programs, as we continue to develop our programs.
Absolutely, that sounds like an important sharing discussion
Next
to
slide.
have. I'd like to now pose another question to Susan. This one comes from Special Olympics Burundi, and it's from Innocent Koishakie. It says, digitization enabled Special Olympics Burundi to prioritize direct contact between families of athletes and coaches. How important do you think this direct contact has been? Is it more important now during COVID-19? What are some of the challenges faced? Let us know what your response is, Susan.
Some grants we get from partners like UNICEF, governments, and many more. Now, one thing to note is that since restricted funds are characterized by specific timelines and goals, each grant or each restricted fund you get you must achieve certain goals within a specific period. With this kind of funding, we do not have actually enough room to build financial sustenance. Because at the end of the day, restricted funds require 100% utilization of the given funds for that specific period and for that specific objective. As we continue to reflect on this, we could see, on the other hand, unrestricted funds are more flexible and would allow programs to use the funds as they deem fit. Of course, within the Special Olympics parameters. If we look, as we continue to reflect, as I mentioned in the beginning, as we continue to reflect on this year, and I would like also to pick from many, reflecting even in the challenges, on the challenges before COVID. One thing we need to maybe ask ourselves is, or some of the questions we need to ask ourselves would include, if we want to enhance cash reserves and build financial sustainability, if we want to improve our program's capacity to deliver relevant and quality services to our athletes, then we need to have, as programs, specific plans to increase our unrestricted funds. As we have seen, you cannot build financial sustenance if all your revenue streams are restricted funds. Just imagine what would happen to your program if CRG was withdrawn today. What would happen to your athletes? Most of our programs are also struggling with staff capacity. While on the other hand, most of the grants, restricted grants we get do not provide for full-time staffing. So the only way to overcome this challenge is to increase our unrestricted funding that can help us to enhance our personnel and our operations as we build cash reserves. Now, at this point of improving personnel and operations, allow me to quote the Special Olympics General Orientation Training. There is a phrase that says, Special Olympics is not a charity, it's a business tool. And we have a lot of confidence in us as a business. But how can we say that we are a business while we are still operating as a charity? Look at our program capacities. For example, and I'm not picking on any of the programs, and it's a challenge to me as well. Most of us are still using Gmail accounts as an official account of the program. Now, internally within us, that has no problem or may not have any impact. But imagine when you're approaching one of your biggest corporate in your countries, and they're asking for your contacts and you're giving them a Gmail account. The question would be, would they take you seriously? That was just an example of improving operations and personnel and other program capacities. And as I mentioned, the challenge we face is that most of the restricted grants we get, even from other donors, non-Special Olympics donors, they don't give us room to improve in this area. Therefore, colleagues, if we are going to achieve the vision of this new strategic plan, in our region, then we have no choice but to diversify our funding streams, and also to give a little bit more attention to unrestricted funds. Next slide. Now, let's pause for a minute and take a poll. These are very simple 3 questions. Like in the morning, they're anonymous, and these questions are just to help us understand where we are as a region. We have a minute to take the polls. I'll encourage each and every one of us to take this poll. Thank you. Please note, we are not trying to investigate your program. These are anonymous questions, and they are just helping us understand what directions do we want to take in our fundraising as part of the bigger strategic plan. Romy, kindly share the poll results once they are ready. Thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. These are very great results, especially in question 1. We can see almost 100% of our programs have started planning their fundraising for this period. Government seems to lead as the first to go to donor for our programs. Now, when we look at our polls and our discussion today, I think the key takeaway points would be: 1, programs are called upon, and especially with this new strategic plan, to develop medium to long-term fundraising plans. And this should not be just as a requirement for the Christmas record grant, the CRG. I know it requires that. And let me just take a pause here. Sometimes when you look at because you send these matching funds and other budgets with accreditation and CRG. When, for example, for accreditation for this year, you've already submitted your operational budgets, which include funds from fundraising. 1 year after, when you compare your plan and your, I think it's called AGR form, there's a lot of disparity. And that's why I want to emphasize that when we are developing these plans, let's not just develop them for the sake of meeting the requirements of the Christmas record grant. Let's not do them for the sake of meeting the accreditation requirements, but let's do them for our athletes in our programs, because we want to raise these resources, we want to improve our capacities, we want to improve our service delivery so that we can transform the lives of our athletes. Secondly, I have seen in the poll, most of us are looking into government. Yes, and rightfully so, especially during this pandemic. But we're also being called to cast our nets wider to expand our revenue streams. Let's start looking into markets that we've not been looking for our fundraising. And lastly, it's the high time we started paying more attention to unrestricted funds and building financial sustenance. And I believe we all had some of these experiences beginning of 2020 when we did not have CRG in the beginning. And always have that thought at the back of your mind. Supposing we don't get these grants, what will happen to our athletes? Will they go back to the shadows they used to be in? That's a big question for all of us. Next slide. So, as Charles mentioned when he was introducing this session, we need to find within ourselves what will make us unique, what will set us apart in order to increase our funding streams. Now, I'm happy that the people in this room are the key people who do fundraising in our programs. And since you engage in this task every day, by now you must have known that competition is very high out there. Just think about it. How many NGOs are in your country? And all of you are competing for the same dollar. Let's look internally. Currently, we have 38 programs in Special Olympics Africa. Let's take CRG as an example. Imagine all of these programs would be competing for that $1 for the CRG grant. This tells us that the slice of cake will continue to get smaller and smaller as the years go by. And in this case, we need to look into ourselves and ask ourselves, what can set us apart from the other organizations, especially in our countries? Why would a donor in my country invest in my program instead of another organization? So we know that Special Olympics is unique in so many components. And as Charles mentioned, we have a very, very good brand, great brand. But in addition to all these components, the uniqueness, the brand, and everything, we have some other unique aspects we have that we have not greatly utilized their potential. And one of these aspects is inclusion. Now, I will not talk about inclusion in this session because it's more or less what we do every day. But I want to talk about the second component, which we underutilize in fundraising, and that is our athletes. All of us, we've not really optimized our athletes as a resource for fundraising. From my experience, and especially as a national director, I always found that it was easier for me to convince a donor if I involved an athlete in the process. It took less energy, less trips to the donor's office, and of course, less back and forth. somehow the deal was sealed faster and sooner if the athlete was part of the process. And I think mine was like learn in the job kind of experience. Because I remember when I first joined Special Olympics Kenya, it was a World Games time. The program was understaffed and they needed all the help they could get. Though I had first joined as a sports coach, I found myself being pulled in all directions, including fundraising. But one thing that stood out for me this time is when I was tasked with I was the one in charge of taking the athletes to meet prospective donors. And now, by that time, since I was assisting the handball coach in the field, the handball team became my crew. And Joe was by then at the helm of Special Olympics Kenya as well. So he was the one who was giving me these fundraising tasks. Though I was also new in Special Olympics then, and I didn't know many of or how things worked in Special Olympics, I could sense some magic the moment the donor met our athletes. From that experience, I developed a way of working with athletes, including in fundraising. But one thing we need to ask ourselves, yes, athletes are a great resource, but for them to be, to be able to actualize themselves as this resource, then we need to prepare them. I will not talk about preparing the athletes in this session because I know the Unified Leadership Team has another session for this. But in this session, we'll only confine ourselves to athletes' role in fundraising. Next slide. So if you want to engage your athletes and your athletes to be your resource for fundraising, the first step is to activate your athletes. And the first level for us in Special Olympics, I think it's the athlete leadership training. Special Olympics has developed so many resources. We have a whole leadership team in the region. If you want to do these trainings, you can get in touch with TAN. But from my experience on working with athletes, I think this is a very, very important stage if we want our athletes to be a resource for the movement. Next slide. Once we've activated the athletes, we've trained them, we need to start empowering them. Empowering athletes can come in so many forms, but the most important thing here is to support them with what they need in order for them to effectively play their roles as leaders. For example, you can provide more training opportunities for our athletes to become more conversant with fundraising or donor relation. Once you identify what support they need, then you need to step in and empower them in this area. Next slide. Once we've activated, we have empowered, we have empowered our athletes. The next stage is to engage them. Now, let me take a pause here and refer to athlete leadership. Most of our programs receive grants from SOI to train our athlete leaders. And I think we all do that. Maybe the only people who've done that, who've not done any athlete leadership training, could be the new programs. But most of the times, it ends there. We train them, we take photos, we report, and it ends there. We don't follow up with engaging them. And we all know that experience is the best teacher. Our athletes cannot be an effective resource if we don't engage them consistently. This means we should engage them at all levels of the task or the initiative. You don't bring them at the end where you've done all planning or roles, everything, mobilization. No, we should bring in our athletes from the onset, and this is from the initiation to the execution. Because the more they are involved, the better they will become. And sometimes I think we are unfair to the athletes when we call on them the last minute. For example, you've secured an appointment from a CEO of one of your banks, and it just clicked to you, you need to go with an athlete, and just maybe it's that morning or it's the day before, you will tell them that we are going to meet so and so. Surely, even if it were you, would you want to be ambushed like that? We need also to respect their time, respect their space, respect them as leaders, as human beings. And that's why I'm saying it's important to involve them from the point of initiation. Another important thing is to be able to listen to our athletes. We don't know everything. And sometimes they see things better than we are. And allow me to quote a story from our chairman, Dr. Tim Shriver. In his book, Fully Alive, he narrates a story of athletes who were given small cameras during the 1995 World Games in order to take pictures of President Bill Clinton, who was the guest of honor in those games. And now it happened that one athlete had the camera facing like inside out. So instead of having the lens face towards the president, he had the lens face to like the way I'm holding my phone, the lens facing towards his eyes, and the big screen is facing the president. And one of the professional journalists thought that the athlete did not know how to use the camera. So he was very good, kindly, he tried to help. So he was like, oh, let me show you how to use a camera. But this athlete said, okay, no, thank you, I'm okay. Look, when you look to the president like this, using the lens, you have a better, clear vision than when you look on the other way around. Now, the reason I'm sharing this story is because it's true. Sometimes the athletes have a better view than us. I have experienced this all the time when I worked with Joshua, an athlete leader in Special Olympics Kenya. And I have experienced it with Jimmy in the region and many other athletes in Special Olympics Kenya. So as we engage, activate, empower them, let's also listen to our athletes. Next slide. No, oh, Maria, sorry. Just go back one slide. Now, any marketing guru will tell you that stories are the drivers of fundraising. And in Special Olympics, especially Special Olympics Africa region, we have plenty of these stories of transformation. If we just reflect on the comments and the examples that came in through this morning of how we managed to reach out to our athletes despite technology challenges, those are great stories. But we don't remember to use our stories as a resource for fundraising. I will not speak so much about stories because I know Romy has a session for that. But what I would want to say is that remember that the story of one athlete, one incident, can bring resources that can transform another 1,000 more athletes. Next slide. I know, and we heard this morning, all of us are trying hard every day to mobilize resources for our athletes. And if we were all to share our stories, probably we'll need another 3 days here. And this conference is about other things too. So because of that, I'll only have one program share their best practices, and they will help us see how they maneuvered this fundraising thing, especially during the pandemic. Now, Raja will be joining us. She's speaking in French. Our interpreter will now join us in English, in the English room, interpreting from French to English. And if you're already in the English room, to hear English, please make no changes. Raja, are you around? Raja, welcome. Okay, welcome. Maria, you can go to the next slide.
Merci à tous. Merci à l'équipe de Special Olympics Africa de nous donner l'opportunité de partager notre expérience sur la levée de fonds et sur les partenariats. Donc, je pense que...
Raja, à parler plus lentement, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Romy. Donc, je disais merci. Bonjour à tout le monde. Et je remercie Special Olympics Africa de me donner l'opportunité de partager l'expérience de Special Olympics Sénégal sur les pratiques de levée de fonds que nous avons eu à mener dans notre programme pour l'année 2020. Je pense qu'on peut passer à la slide suivante. Alors, nous avons eu pour 2020 une première subvention qui était une subvention restreinte, comme l'a expliqué Suzanne tout à l'heure dans sa présentation. C'est une subvention que nous avons reçue de l'ambassade des États-Unis au Sénégal, dont le thème portait sur le leadership. Donc, pour répondre à cette demande de subvention, nous avons eu l'appui, l'assistance technique des équipes de SOA et de SOI, car ce n'était pas évident pour nous de répondre à une demande qui d'abord était en anglais et ensuite avec des spécificités bien particulières. Donc, l'appui de SOA et de SOI a été très utile et c'est une occasion pour moi de les remercier. Alors, l'activité devait d'abord se faire de manière présentielle, puisque c'était un camp de vacances qui portait sur le sport et le leadership. Mais compte tenu de la pandémie et de la situation qui ne permettait plus de nous réunir, nous avons changé le format et nous l'avons fait en format virtuel. Prochaine slide. Next, please. Donc, ont été impliqués dans ce projet 9 sites d'entraînement de Special Olympics Sénégal. Et c'est un projet qui était réservé aux jeunes filles. Donc, nous avons eu 200 jeunes qui ont été engagés, qui sont toujours engagés dans le projet, puisque le projet se poursuit jusqu'à fin juin, avec une majorité de jeunes filles. Alors, sur cette photo, vous voyez la cérémonie d'ouverture, la cérémonie officielle d'ouverture, avec les représentants de l'ambassade des États-Unis et les représentants des différents sous-programmes et de sites qui participent au projet. Ce qu'il y a de particulier dans ce projet, c'est qu'il nous a permis d'équiper tous les sites qui participent à ce projet en matériel audiovisuel et en matériel informatique. Donc, chacun des projets a reçu un ordinateur, a reçu un vidéoprojecteur et a reçu également un boîtier de connexion Internet avec un crédit de connexion qui est renouvelé à chaque activité. Et cela nous a donné également l'opportunité de découvrir, prochaine slide, slide suivante, on a eu l'opportunité de découvrir les aptitudes de nos athlètes. Comme vous le voyez sur ces photos, nous avons découvert des athlètes qui ont des aptitudes manuelles et qui ont des aptitudes également pour aller à l'école. Donc, sur la première photo, vous voyez une jeune fille qui a confectionné un porte-clés. Une jeune fille également qui a participé à des activités de transformation de céréales, puisque nous avons beaucoup misé sur la nutrition, comme c'est une activité de leadership et que nous devions capaciter les participants pour qu'ils puissent acquérir de nouvelles compétences. Et nous avons également découvert des jeunes filles qui savaient broder, qui savaient coudre. Donc aujourd'hui, de nouvelles perspectives s'ouvrent pour ces jeunes filles et nous sommes dans une dynamique de réfléchir à de nouveaux projets qui découleraient du projet financé par l'ambassade des États-Unis. Slide suivante. Next, please. Un autre de nos partenaires, c'est Speak Up Africa, qui nous accompagne depuis 2014, qui a signé la déclaration de Lilongwe à l'issue du sommet de haut niveau qu'il y avait eu au Malawi. Et donc, Speak Up nous a accompagnés sur la lutte contre la COVID en nous offrant 500 masques, 500 dépliants sur la COVID-19. Nous avons également l'opportunité de participer au challenge 19 Kick qui avait été organisé par Speak Up Africa en partenariat avec la Confédération africaine de football. Et nous avons également eu un article d'opinion dirigé par la direction de Special Olympics Sénégal et qui a été partagé sur les réseaux sociaux de Speak Up Africa. Next, please. Il est vrai que Speak Up Africa, ce n'était pas un don, ce n'était pas une participation, une contribution financière, mais c'était un don en nature qui a été très apprécié. Next, please. En complément de Speak Up Africa, nous avons également participé à une campagne intitulée Lohoyaka, Hands of Hope, qui est menée par une ONG, une association intitulée Imagination Africa. Et cette campagne Hands of Hope a été également financée par l'ambassade des États-Unis. Donc, quelle a été la participation de Special Olympics Sénégal? Cela nous a donné l'opportunité de pouvoir communiquer sur nos activités, surtout pendant la pandémie, pour expliquer aux parents que le sport est un moyen de lutter contre le stress et d'offrir des activités adaptées à leurs enfants. Donc, on a eu une campagne de communication sur les bus. Vous voyez cette affiche a circulé donc dans toute la région de Dakar. Elle était affichée sur les bus. Nous avons eu une campagne de communication sur les médias sociaux et sur les radios. Next, please. Avoir participé à la campagne Lohoyakar nous a donné également l'opportunité de pouvoir participer à la première édition au Sénégal de Giving Tuesday. C'est un concept qu'on ne connaît pas beaucoup dans la zone francophone, mais qui est très prisé dans les pays anglo-saxons. Et donc, c'est le premier mardi du mois de décembre qui est dédié aux dons. Donc, nous avons eu l'opportunité de pouvoir y participer. Je vais m'attarder un peu sur le Giving Tuesday pour dire que c'est notre participation à la campagne Lohoyakar qui nous a permis de bénéficier de cette campagne. Parce que c'est la même personne, c'est la même équipe qui gérait la campagne Lohoyakar. Elle a été, comment dirais-je, elle a beaucoup apprécié notre contribution au cours de cette campagne et elle nous a demandé si nous étions intéressés pour participer au Giving Tuesday. Donc, next, please. Next slide, please. Un autre partenariat, mais celui-ci, je vais le brosser rapidement, c'est notre partenariat avec le ministère de la Santé et de l'Action sociale qui nous a donné l'opportunité de pouvoir faire vacciner nos athlètes contre la pandémie de la COVID-19. Next, please. Nous avons eu également dans nos différentes campagnes de levée de fonds l'appui du conseil d'administration. Nous avons intégré de nouveaux membres du conseil qui se sont vraiment engagés à nous accompagner dans la levée de fonds. Certains ont été très dynamiques pour cela. Nous avons également un membre du conseil qui nous a promis un atelier sur la levée de fonds. Il devait se faire depuis le mois de mars. Malheureusement, compte tenu de son emploi du temps, on a dû le reporter. Nous avons également bénéficié du carnet d'adresses de certains de nos membres du conseil qui nous ont introduits auprès de leurs connaissances. Next, please. Alors, en conclusion, ce que je voudrais partager, c'est qu'il faut que nous soyons très réactifs sur les opportunités de levée de fonds. Même si parfois certaines levées de fonds sont restrictives, elles donnent l'opportunité de créer, d'offrir de nouvelles activités, et comme celle de l'ambassade des États-Unis, qui nous a vraiment donné l'opportunité de pouvoir travailler de manière régulière et de plus près, de manière plus précise avec nos athlètes féminines, et qui nous a permis de découvrir des talents que nous pouvons exploiter par la suite. Il faut qu'il y ait un bon contact avec le partenaire ou le sponsor qui nous accompagne, parce que cela permet d'ouvrir de nouvelles portes. C'est ce qui nous est arrivé avec notre participation à la campagne Le Royakar, et qui nous a redirigés donc vers la campagne Giving Tuesday. Même si la première édition de la campagne Giving Tuesday n'a pas été une levée de fonds importante, au moins on a eu de nouveaux contacts avec de nouveaux bailleurs potentiels, et nous espérons pouvoir renouveler cela pour l'année 2021. Et bien entendu, le rôle des membres du conseil d'administration est crucial, parce qu'au niveau de la direction, des coachs et des volontaires, nous sommes sur le terrain, nous gérons le quotidien, et nous n'avons pas souvent ni toujours les moyens d'aller vers certaines personnes qui peuvent nous accompagner pour nos activités en nous ouvrant des portes ou en nous faisant des sponsoring, en nous accordant des sponsoring. Donc, le rôle des membres du conseil d'administration est extrêmement important. Voilà ce que je voulais partager avec vous ce matin. Et bien entendu, je reste disponible pour plus de précisions et pour répondre à vos questions si nécessaire. Merci à tous.
Romy, do you have any questions?
Great. Yes, thank you, Susan. I will now be moving to our Q&A. We've had some great comments for Susan and Raja that are around the presentation. Some of the comments that I'll just read before we go to the questions are, thank you, Raja. Thank you, Susan. We congratulate you for your presentation on fundraising. I've picked something beneficial for the program, says Charles Reyes. Sheila says, wow, Raja, nice work. I must get to you so that initiatives like this are done as well in my program. Anik says, bravo to you, Raja, for your formidable work. Urban says, Raja, you are the best, definitely the way to go. Charles Ray says, Senegal, you're doing great things. I will reach you privately to learn more about Giving Tuesday. And Niani says, merci. Hawa says, bon travail. Jean-Marie says, super. Ansela says, great job, Raja. And Aminata says, wonderful presentation. So it's great feedback. And then I'd like to please go to our open questions. Our first comes from Sheila. And the question is, from Special Olympics Rwanda, and the question is, firstly, thanks for the presentation. My question is, normally on the board, there has to be a seat for an athlete. Now, when it comes to the fundraising committee from within the board, is an athlete supposed to be there too, that is, in the fundraising committee? Additionally, briefly describe what could their roles be when, for example, a program is drafting a fundraising plan or budget. I think this question goes to Susan, but I'd also like Raja to feel free to add a response as well if she has one.
Thanks, Susan. Thank you, Romy. I think I'll answer, and maybe Raja can give an example because our board is also very, very active in fundraising. Sheila, thank you for the question. And maybe one thing I could say is, first of all, and most importantly, is that the athlete in the board is an equal board member. So he's equal to the other board members. Therefore, this means that this athlete has a right to be a member of any of the board committees, including fundraising committee. Now, I'll just give you a brief best practice from one of our programs and Special Olympics Kenya, since I was there for a long time. Their model is that the athlete leader in the board is a member of all board subcommittees, just like the national director. So they are members of all board subcommittees, and they have a role to contribute to the discussions and decisions of that subcommittee. Having said that, there are so many ways you can use, there are so many roles the athlete can play. If you could stop looking at that athlete as an athlete and look them as an equal board member, then you could identify their strengths, you could see what value they can add. But the moment you like model them just as label them just an athlete, you might not see what they could bring on board, because roles will also depend with the talents and the gifts of that athlete. But one of the things in fundraising, you can start engaging them in brainstorming. When you're brainstorming your fundraising ideas, when you are allocating your budgets, I believe they will have very, very, very valuable information to add to the discussion. And Sheila, if you want, we can take this discussion offline and see how we can support you with that. Raja, do you have something to say on that to Sheila?
Oui, je voudrais compléter ce que Suzanne vient de dire. Et effectivement, pour le Sénégal, chaque fois que nous nous déplaçons pour aller voir un sponsor potentiel ou un partenaire potentiel, nous y allons avec un athlète. Ce n'est pas toujours l'athlète qui est au conseil d'administration, parce que nous voulons que chacun des athlètes se sente concerné. Donc, à tour de rôle, nous avons sélectionné 2 à 3 athlètes qui nous accompagnent pour ces rencontres.
Thank you. We have so many questions coming in and we're running out of time. But it's wonderful that there is so much engagement. Well, let me first recognize Yannick from our Regional Athlete Input Council, who says, please give him an example of what the role of athletes are in fundraising. So very briefly, Susan, and then I'll try fit in at least 2 more questions.
Thank you, Yannick. One of the roles an athlete can play in fundraising, other than, brainstorming with the team, they could be the ones speaking to the donor, sharing your story to the donor, showing the donor how Special Olympics has transformed your life, showing the donor how their investment in your program is going to touch many more lives. Now, Yannick, the difference here is, if you say that to the donor feels, one, that his funds are going to make a change to other athletes because he has seen the change in you. 2, it's not the same as a person who, for example, if I am the national director, it's not the same as me going to talk to the donor, because the donor will not really see that change in me, but they can see that change in you. And there are many other roles that an athlete can play. And since I know we have a session on unified leadership, I think some of these roles will also be coming out very strongly in that session.
Great. Then we have some quite meaty questions, which I might have to ask Susan and Raja to address after this, I'm afraid. But they are noted and we will get to them. But we have Aye Dolo from Liberia, who wants to know, how does a brand new program move from restricted funds to unrestricted funds? Great question. And then 2 from Nieni from Togo, who wants to know what the different roles are between the board and the national director and staff in fundraising. And then a follow-up question he has is, do you need a dedicated committee in the board for fundraising? These are all very important questions and we will not let them drop. We will be answering them in our Q&A sheet that we will send to our participants. But for now, we will unfortunately have to close our Q&A due to time, as we respect your time very much and would like to end on time. So for now, I'll hand over back to Susan, and after which we'll hear from the wrap-up from Charles. Thank you, everyone. That was great engagement in the Q&A box, and I can see that there will be many rich discussions to follow.
Yes, Romy, thank you. And thank you for picking up those questions. For sure, we will get back to you, Ngeni and Liberia, and anybody else who has a question. Now, for more information, we've posted some helpful resources in the dashboard that was shared with you. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the region is always available to support you. So utilize us as a resource and feel free to reach any one of us. For example, if it's a question of athletes, we have athlete leadership team. If the question of stories, we have the marketing team. So do not hesitate to reach out to us for more information, and also you can utilize the resources we have shared. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you, Raja, for facilitating this session with me. Thank you.